She hit the ground hard. Dirt kicked up around her face as her shoulder took the brunt of the fall. A sharp sting crawled up her collarbone, but she didn't make a sound. No grunt, no wince. Just silence. Laughter erupted from behind. "Did you trip over your own feet, ma'am?" One cadet sneered, not even bothering to hide his amusement. Another chimed in, louder this time. "Careful. Don't want you breaking a hip out here!" More laughter, echoing through the open training field, where sweat mixed with pride and youthful arrogance. The woman on the ground didn't respond. Slowly, she pressed one hand into the dirt, lifted herself up, and dusted off her knees. Her expression never changed. Stone cold. She was older than the others, sure. Mid-30s, maybe even early 40s. Gray streaks brushed the edges of her tied-back hair. Her uniform was standard-issue Navy PT gear. Nothing flashy. No insignia. No hint of rank. To the cadets watching, she didn't belong. One leaned over to another and whispered not so quietly, "Is she even supposed to be here?" The reply came with a snort. "Probably some admin who got bored of pushing papers." They all laughed again, but this time, a few noticed something. She was standing again, unshaken, unbothered, looking right through them. Not a single muscle twitched, not in anger, not in shame. Just a quiet stillness that somehow made the air feel heavier. Her name tag read Carter, but no one there knew what that meant. The commanding officer, standing near the edge of the field with a clipboard, said nothing. He'd seen it all. He checked his watch, logged the time, watched how she moved, and smiled, just barely. The cadets didn't know what kind of mistake they had just made. The fall was not an accident. Not entirely. One of the younger men, Jeffries, had accidentally elbowed her as they rounded a tight corner during their morning run. They all saw it. No one said a word. This was part of the culture. Break the weak links early. Weed out the ones who couldn't keep up. Only this time, the link they tried to break was forged in combat. After the run, the cadets gathered near the water station. Elise walked past them, slow and steady. Not limping, not shaken. She picked up a bottle, drank half, walked away. No eye contact, no response. "Robot mode," someone muttered behind her. "Weird." One of the female cadets narrowed her eyes. "You saw that, right?" She didn't even react. "Like, at all." "Yeah," another added, quieter now. "That's not normal." They were right, but not for the reason they thought. In her mind, Elise Carter wasn't even on that field. She was somewhere else. Years ago. Another morning, another run, only that time it was sand instead of dirt. The air hotter, the sound sharper, every step marked by adrenaline and gunpowder Kandahar a SEAL team extraction. Under heavy fire, she had carried a bleeding man on her shoulders for nearly 2 kilometers under enemy watch. No one laughed at her then. Not after she dragged a man twice her size back to the helo zone while returning fire with one arm. That moment, frozen in her memory like a scar, returned often, especially when she saw young men with shiny boots and smug faces. Back in the present, Elise Carter moved through the academy hallways like a shadow. She didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't linger in the mess hall, didn't laugh with the others. Most wrote her off immediately, too old. Too quiet, too nothing. But the instructors knew. They had read the file. It had come sealed. Black ink over most of the pages. Classified operations, dates redacted, names blacked out. But one thing stood out. Div Gru Navy Special Warfare Development Group SEAL Team. 6-4 tours, Silver Star, Navy Cross, Purple Heart, survived a downed Black Hawk, rescued 2 hostages in Somalia, the kind of file that made even the most hardened officer raise an eyebrow. And yet, here she was, on the field with fresh cadets, not to lead, not to train, to watch, to see how they handled stress, judgment, pressure, how they treated those they didn't understand. And already, the test had begun. 1 push, 1 fall. They failed, not because they laughed, but because not a single one stopped to ask who she was. The academy didn't ask questions. Orders came down from higher up. Insert her into Class 412. Let her blend in. No briefings, no introductions. Just drop her into the ranks like a ghost. Most cadets assumed she was a paperwork error. One of those mid-career transfers who couldn't cut it in the admin world. She let them think that. In fact, she counted on it. By the second week, the whispers had grown louder. She doesn't talk to anyone. She always finishes runs dead last. Is she even military? But one thing didn't add up. She never quit. Not once. She did every push-up, every rep, every hike, never asking for help, never falling behind. Always quiet, always watching, and always writing things down. It started to bother them. People who fall behind are supposed to be desperate, loud, defensive, angry. She was none of those things. She just existed. Like a shadow that didn't belong to anyone. Jeffries, the cadet who pushed her down, made her his personal project. She's just bluffing, he said one evening in the barracks. I'll break her. You'll see. He didn't say it to be cruel. He said it like he was proving something, but he didn't understand who he was talking about. Elise Carter had buried more friends than most of these kids had buried pets. She had sat in pitch black, Afghan caves listening to enemy boots crunch gravel overhead, not daring to breathe. She had fought hand-to-hand with a Taliban fighter twice her size when her sidearm jammed. She had been shot, stitched up, and sent back out before her blood had dried, and she never told anyone, because that's what she signed up for. Not recognition, not medals, not applause, mission first, always. And now, her mission was them. One morning, during weapons training, she stood at the edge of the range. While the others practiced marksmanship, Jeffries watched her, smirked. He handed her a pistol. Bet, you haven't fired one of these since the Gulf War, he joked. Elise took it without a word, no stance correction, no hesitation, no adjustment. She lifted the pistol, aimed down range, and fired 5 shots. Instructor walked over to the target, all 5 in the black, 2 in the bullseye. She handed the pistol back and walked off without waiting for praise. The range went quiet for the first time. The cadets didn't laugh. Later that night, Jeffries sat alone. He didn't say much when another cadet nudged him and said, "Still think she's bluffing?" Jeffries shook his head. That was no bluff. That was muscle memory. In her bunk, Elise sat with a small photo tucked inside a worn notebook. 4 men. 1 woman, SEALs. Her old unit. One of them was gone now. Somalia. 2017, she kept their photo not for nostalgia, but as a reminder. She had promised them she'd make sure the next generation wouldn't forget what real service looked like. Respect, integrity, quiet strength. The things these cadets didn't understand yet, but she was going to teach them, even if they hated her for it. The instructors kept their distance as ordered. Let the evaluation play out. But they watched closely, especially after the range. And then came the obstacle course. Tall walls, mud pits, rope climbs, designed to break bodies and test minds. Jeffries made sure he was directly behind her. When she reached the rope wall, he moved fast, too fast, slammed into her back. She lost her grip, dropped 6 feet, rolled, groans from the others. Injury? An instructor called out. She stood up. Brushed mud off her face. Negative. Got back on the rope and climbed. No complaints. No emotion, just movement. At the top, she looked down at Jeffries. Their eyes met. He didn't smirk this time. He looked confused, a little scared, because he saw something in her eyes. Not rage. Not weakness, control. Like she had faced worse than this 100 times before, and didn't even consider this worth feeling. That night, Jeffries found her in the empty mess hall. "You've done this before?" he said. Not a question. A realization. Elise didn't answer. He nodded slowly. "You're not one of us, are you?" She looked at him for the first time. "I'm exactly what you're supposed to become." And with that, she stood and left him sitting there, surrounded by questions he wasn't ready to ask. Morning inspection started at 0500 sharp. Cadets lined up in 2 rows, boots polished, chins high, uniforms sharp. But even in perfect formation, eyes wandered. They couldn't help it. There she was again. Elise Carter, standing at the far end of the line. Same blank expression, same silent presence. Whispers had turned into curiosity. Some were starting to respect her. Others were still unsure. And a few were growing nervous, because questions were piling up fast. Why didn't she flinch? Why did she shoot like that? Why didn't anyone seem to know who she was? Jeffries hadn't spoken to her since the mess hall, but he'd been watching, and so had Lieutenant Ramirez, the lead instructor. He wasn't a fan of secrets, especially ones walking around his academy in full view. After inspection, Ramirez pulled aside a junior officer and spoke quietly. "That woman," he said. "Carter, where's her transfer paperwork?" The junior officer hesitated. "It's sealed, sir." "Sealed?" Ramirez frowned. "By who?" "Office of Naval Intelligence, sir." Ramirez blinked. That wasn't standard. That wasn't even close. He didn't ask further, but now he knew. This wasn't a mistake. This was a test, and she wasn't here for training. She was here for them. Later that afternoon, the cadets were called into the war room, a surprise strategy exercise. The screen at the front of the room lit up with an overhead view of terrain, mountains, riverbeds, abandoned structures. The scenario was simple. A joint NATO unit trapped behind enemy lines, limited comms, zero air support, extraction required, split into teams, plan the mission, present the plan in 1 hour. Elise sat at the edge of Team Bravo, quiet, taking notes. As soon as the discussion started, Jeffries tried to take control. "All right, listen up. We flank from the east. 2 go up the ridge. We create a distraction with a dummy charge here." "No," Elise said without looking up. The room paused. Jeffries looked at her. "Excuse me?" She finally looked up. "Calm. There's no tree cover on the ridge. You'll be spotted before you climb 20 feet. And the riverbed is a kill zone. Too exposed." Another cadet frowned. "So what do we do instead?" Elise stood and walked to the screen. She pointed. "Insert at nightfall. From the south. Use thermal blockers. Move through the ravine here. This line," she traced a route with her finger, "is a forgotten goat path. It's not on the new satellite maps, but it was used by smugglers during the early stages of the war." Silence. Jeffries stared. "How do you even know that?" Elise's eyes didn't blink. "Because I used it." The instructor raised an eyebrow. Someone else whispered, "Used it? In training?" "No," she said simply. "In 2013, Operation Crescent Blade." The instructor froze. That was a classified op. Deep in Afghanistan. No civilian should have even heard that name, and suddenly the room understood. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't pretending. She had lived it. The rest of the strategy meeting was different. No more jokes, no interruptions. Everyone listened. For the first time, Elise Carter wasn't invisible. She was the only one in the room who had actually been there. Later that night in the locker room, Jeffries sat alone. His bravado cracked. He stared at his boots, then glanced across the room. Elise was lacing hers. He walked over slowly. "You were there," he said. She nodded once. "What happened?" She looked up. For a moment, she seemed to decide whether to answer. Then she spoke. "We went in clean. Extraction of 2 UN contractors. Got compromised. 5 of us made it out. 1 didn't." Jeffrey swallowed hard. "You saw combat?" She didn't blink. "I didn't see it. I lived in it." Then she stood. "Good night, cadet." He didn't stop her. That evening, the instructors gathered in the command center. Lieutenant Ramirez reviewed the footage from the strategy session. He watched her take control, watched the cadets shift from arrogance to respect. He clicked a file. Her real file. Access was limited, but he had clearance. Navy. Cross.Silverstar.Joint Service. Commendation. Multiple deployments. 2 confirmed hostage rescues. 1. Deep cover operation that ended in a high-value target. Neutralization. She wasn't just a veteran, she was a ghost, and now she was. Walking the halls with kids who thought grit meant running an extra mile. He closed the file and leaned, back in his chair. They didn't know it. But Class 412 had been given a gift. Not many would survive her test. But the ones who did would never forget the woman who taught them what real leadership looked like. The sirens blared at 2:13 a.m., loud, piercing, echoing off every wall in the dormitory. Cadets stumbled out of their bunks, confused and half-dressed. The emergency lights flickered red as the hall filled with shadows and panic. "Fire drill!" someone shouted. Another voice called out, "No, that's real smoke!" Thick plumes curled from under the stairwell. Smoke alarms shrieked. The air was hot and tasted like metal. Shoes slapped against the tile floors. Shouts filled the hallway. "Get out! Move, move, move!" "Where's Rodriguez?" No one knew. Cadet Rodriguez had been on bed rest after a twisted ankle. His room was closest to the laundry wing, right where the smoke was pouring out. Chaos ruled. Jeffries reached the exit with the others. Coughing, eyes burning, instructors stood outside doing head counts. "Rodriguez isn't here!" someone yelled. Everyone looked around. No one moved. Then Elise Carter stepped forward. She didn't speak. She didn't wait. She turned and ran back into the building. No protective gear. No oxygen mask. "Just her instinct! Stop her!" An officer yelled, but no one could. She had already vanished into the black smoke. Inside, visibility dropped to inches. The hallway glowed red with emergency lighting. The heat rose fast. The alarm screamed. She moved low, breathing through her shirt. Counting doors, second on the left. She remembered. She reached Rodriguez's door. Jammed shut. She kicked once. Nothing. Twice. The third kick snapped the lock. Rodriguez was unconscious, slumped halfway off his bunk. Smoke rolled in waves across the ceiling. She didn't hesitate, dropped to her knees. Lifted him. Dead weight, easily, 180 pounds. She pulled him up over her back and shoulders, tightened her grip, and stood. One step at a time. The flames hadn't reached the hall yet, but they were coming. She retraced her path, counting seconds, staying low. Each breath was harder than the last. Then she saw it. The exit light glowing faintly through the haze. She pushed forward. Rodriguez groaned, just barely conscious. When she burst through the door, the cold night air hit her like a slap. Everyone turned. There she was, covered in soot. Face blackened, shirt soaked in sweat. Rodriguez still on her back. She lowered him gently to the ground. The medics took over. No words were spoken. Not yet. Jeffries stared. Wide-eyed, Lieutenant Ramirez walked over. Stunned. "How did you know where he was?" Elise didn't answer right away. She stared at the building, chest rising and falling with slow, controlled breaths. Then she looked at Ramirez. "I pay attention." Later, back inside, after the fire was contained and the cadets returned to the dorms, no one slept. They sat in silence, processing. Jeffries finally broke it. She didn't even think about it. "She just ran in," another cadet said quietly. "I would have frozen." A third added, "I did freeze." Morning formation came early. No one complained. At 600, the entire class stood at attention on the main field. The instructors didn't say much. Just watched. Elise stood off to the side. Back in her PT gear. No rank displayed. Just calm, unreadable silence. Rodriguez was alive. Stable. The fire had started due to faulty wiring, but that wasn't what everyone was thinking about. They were thinking about her. And what they had just witnessed. Courage. Without command, action without permission. Duty. Without recognition. When the commandant arrived, he didn't waste time. "You all trained for hypotheticals," he said. "Last night was real." He turned toward Elise. "This woman, who you dismissed, who you underestimated, just did what every one of you should have done." The cadets looked down. The commandant continued. "Do you know who she is?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Commander Elise Carter, Navy SEAL, retired, 4 combat tours, DevGru. Decorations include the Silver Star, Navy Cross, and 2 commendations for valor under fire." Dead silence. Eyes widened. Not one of them had imagined that. "She's not here to impress you," the commandant said. "She's here to test you." Jeffries met her eyes. No words passed between them. He just gave the smallest nod, and Elise, just for a moment, nodded back. not in pride. Not in triumph, but in recognition. One soldier to another. That night changed everything. No more jokes. No more whispers. They didn't just respect her now, they feared her. Because they finally understood. She wasn't just a woman in uniform. She was a warfighter, and none of them were, ready to match what she had already lived through. The night air was quiet again. The smoke had cleared. The alarms were silent. But Elise Carter couldn't sleep. She sat alone on the concrete steps behind the barracks, her elbows resting on her knees, a worn photograph in her hands. 5 faces smiled back at her. 4 men. 1 woman, all in desert camo, standing beside a Black Hawk in the blistering Afghan sun. One of them had a Sharpie mustache drawn across his face. Another held up 2 fingers behind Elise's head, like bunny ears. That picture had been taken 3 days before everything went wrong. Kandahar, 2011. It had started as a routine extraction. Intel said the target location was clear. A 2-hour mission in and out. Her team inserted just after midnight. Moonless sky. 0 visibility. But the intel was wrong. Very wrong. They were ambushed within minutes. Gunfire lit up the valley. The echo bounced off the rocks like thunder. Elise remembered the sound of the first explosion. An IED buried beneath the path. It sent 2 of them flying. One didn't move again. The others returned fire, held their position, called for air support. Nothing. Comms were jammed. The enemy was prepared. She dragged Lieutenant Mason behind cover while rounds smacked into the dirt inches away. He was bleeding badly, shrapnel in the gut, barely conscious. He looked up at her and said, "Don't let me slow you down." She ignored him, pressed gauze to his wound. Rechecked the perimeter, returned fire. By the time she reached the evac point, Mason was still breathing, and she was covered in blood that wasn't hers. They lost 2 that night. One of them was the guy with the Sharpie mustache. His name was Daniels. He had a daughter back home who sent him letters with glitter stickers on the envelope. Elise had one of those letters tucked into the back of her notebook. She never mailed it. She never found the words. After that mission, she was different. Not broken. Not bitter, just colder. Quieter. The only thing that kept her going was the promise she made at Daniel's grave. "I'll make sure they remember us." Now, over a decade later, she was keeping that promise. But the cost never got lighter. Behind her, footsteps approached, slow, hesitant. It was Jeffries. He stopped a few feet away and didn't say anything at first. Just looked at the photo in her hand. "Is that your old team?" She nodded once. "They were SEALs?" "They were everything," she said. He sat down beside her, unsure if he was allowed to, but she didn't stop him. After a long silence, he asked quietly, "Was it worth it?" She didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "Some days, yes. Some days, I wonder." "I didn't know who you were," he admitted. "None of us did." "You weren't supposed to. Then why tell us now?" She looked at him. "Because when the time comes, and it will come, you'll have to decide who you really are. And if I can help even one of you make the right choice, then maybe it was worth it." He nodded slowly. The next day, everything changed. The cadets didn't just follow her lead. They studied her, learned from her, asked questions. She never bragged, never gave speeches, but she started sharing stories, small ones, tactical lessons buried in quiet memories. How to move without being seen. How to keep breathing when your heart is racing. How to trust your gut when the map lies. She didn't teach like an instructor. She taught like a survivor, and the cadets listened. Even Ramirez changed. One morning, he pulled her aside. "I read the full report," he said. "Kandahar, Crescent Blade, Somalia, everything." Elise didn't react. "You shouldn't be here. You should be sitting in a Pentagon office writing manuals." "I don't belong behind a desk," she said. "No, you don't," he agreed. "But I think you belong here more than any of us realized." That night, Elise found a letter slipped under her door. No name. No rank, just a folded piece of paper. It said, You saved my life. I want to become someone who deserves that." She folded the letter and placed it in her notebook, next to the glitter-covered one from Daniel's daughter. Then she turned out the light and went to sleep. For the first time in years, she didn't dream about gunfire. The storm hit in the middle of night maneuvers. Wind screamed through the valley. Rain came sideways. Visibility dropped to near zero. Cadets staggered across the muddy trail, soaked, disoriented, and exhausted. This was supposed to be a map and compass test, but nature had rewritten the rules. Flashlights cut weak lines through the downpour. Compasses trembled in shaky hands. Lieutenant Ramirez stood at the ridge checkpoint, arms crossed, watching. Most of them were failing, and yet one team was ahead. Moving in formation, adjusted pace. Calling out markers, Team Delta. Elise Carter's team. She wasn't leading from the front. She was in the middle, guiding by example. No barked commands, no dramatics, just small corrections, quiet clarity. Her voice cut through the rain only when it had to. Shift east. That creek bends north. Keep your feet low. Mud gives out on that slope. Don't trust the tree line. There's a drop just past it. They reached the final checkpoint first, soaking wet, breathing hard. But every cadet on that team wore the same look. Alert, calm, steady. Ramirez took note. Back at base, the instructors compared notes. Across multiple exercises, Carter's cadets performed better cohesion, better reaction times, fewer mistakes. One instructor shook his head. She's turning them into soldiers. Not just cadets, soldiers, Ramirez agreed. But he also knew something else. Time was running out. Carter had only been cleared for temporary assignment. And the Navy didn't loan out their ghosts for long. Her stay was almost over. The cadets didn't know that. Not yet. But word always finds a way through. And one morning, as the sun rose over the field, whispers spread like wildfire. She's leaving. Did you hear? Carter's out next week? No way. She hasn't even... But then they saw her walking across the field. Backpack slung, orders in hand. She paused. Turned toward the class, no speech. No ceremony. But they all stopped what they were doing. One by one they straightened. Jeffrey stepped forward. You're really going? Elise nodded. Was this just an assignment? She shook her head. It was a promise. To who? To those who didn't make it back. He didn't ask more. But something in her voice silenced everyone. Ramirez approached her with the final log. Want to say anything to them? She glanced at the cadets. All standing now. Everything I needed to say, I already showed them. He nodded. She turned to go, but just before she reached the gate, Jeffries called out. Commander Carter! She stopped. He stepped forward again, raised his hand, a sharp, perfect salute. Then another cadet followed, then another. Within seconds, the entire class stood at attention, saluting, not because they were told, because they meant it. Elise turned back, returned the salute, just once. Then she left. That night, the barracks were quiet, but Jeffries couldn't sleep. He pulled out his notebook and flipped to a blank page. He wrote, She never raised her voice. But every time she spoke, I listened. She didn't brag, but she had more courage than anyone I've ever met. She didn't save us from fire or storms or failure. She saved us from becoming the kind of soldiers who forget what it means to serve. Weeks passed. Training continued, but everything had changed. Cadets helped each other more, listened better. Took nothing for granted. The academy noticed, so did command. Then one day, a sealed envelope arrived in Ramirez's office. Inside, one photo, a woman, standing with a group of Afghan children. Smiling, and below it, scribbled in pen, Mission continues. You've got a good group. Keep them sharp. Signed, C. Ramirez smiled. She was gone, but not forgotten, and the legacy of the woman they once laughed at now marched forward in every bootstep they took. 3 months after Elise Carter left the academy, Class 412 faced its final evaluation. Not a written test, not a fitness drill, A live simulation, real terrain, live comms, unpredictable conditions, a 48-hour joint force exercise with active Marines overseeing the operation. This was the last filter, the final gauntlet before graduation. And for Jeffries and the others, it felt different now, because they weren't just proving themselves to the Navy. They were carrying someone else's legacy. The scenario was brutal. Enemy combatants had seized a supply convoy and taken hostages. The cadets had to plan the assault, breach the compound, and extract the captives without losing anyone. It wasn't real combat, but it felt real. The screams, the smoke, the chaos. Team Delta, the same group Elise had mentored, led the infiltration. Jeffries took point, and as he crawled through mud under razor wire, he heard her voice in his head, low and slow. Don't think. Just move. They reached the outer fence. Cadet Ramirez, no relation to the instructor, cut the wire. No chatter. Just silent hand signals. They moved in. Inside, role players shouted, shoved, and fired blanks. The stress was overwhelming, but Delta didn't break. They split into pairs, cleared rooms, secured hostages. Jeffries took a simulated wound to the leg. Pain flared, but he kept moving. Elise had drilled them on this. If you can walk, you fight. If you can't walk, you crawl. If you can't crawl, you shoot from the ground. But you never ever give up. He dragged a hostage behind cover. Ramirez secured the exit. Team Bravo arrived late, 2 members confused by a map misread. By the time the mission ended, only one team had completed every objective without losing a life. Team Delta. The evaluators debriefed in silence, then one Marine officer broke the quiet. Who trained them? Ramirez smiled. No one, he said. They trained themselves. She just showed them how. The report went straight to command, top marks, flawless execution. But when the commandant stepped forward at the graduation ceremony, he didn't open with numbers. He opened with a name. Commander Elise Carter. The class stood taller. No applause. Just reverence. Most of you laughed when she arrived. You doubted her. Some of you even tried to break her. He looked directly at Jeffries. And she let you. Jeffries didn't flinch. She let you underestimate her, because she needed to see who you were, before she showed you who she was. The silence was deep, heavy. Her evaluation of this class went beyond drills and strategy. She tested your hearts, your character, and you passed, barely. He paused. She was one of us, but she didn't need a uniform to command respect. She earned it. And if you're lucky, maybe one day someone will say the same about you. The flags flapped in the wind. The Navy hymn played. Then came the pins, the ranks, the salutes. But one thing stuck with Jeffries more than anything else. When he stepped forward to receive his insignia, the commandant handed him a second item, a folded slip of paper. From her, he said. Jeffries opened it after the ceremony, hands shaking, in her tight, steady handwriting. It said, I saw your weakness first, but I stayed long enough to see your strength. Lead well, no signature, she didn't need one. Weeks passed. Assignments were issued. The cadets became officers. Some were deployed, some sent to command training, a few joined special units. Jeffries received orders for the Pacific Fleet. Before he left, he visited the academy one last time. He stood at the edge of the obstacle course, staring at the rope wall. The same one where he'd once tried to humiliate her. Back when he thought toughness was loud. Back before he understood. He climbed it slowly, reached the top, and sat there, watching the sun set over the training field. From his pocket, he pulled out the note she'd written him, folded, worn. He placed it gently in the crack of the wood, a quiet tribute to the woman who taught them all how to fight, not just wars, but weakness, and who reminded them that real strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it just stands back up without a word. The years passed, but her name never left the halls of the academy. Every new class heard the story, not from lectures or textbooks, from the ones who had seen it themselves. They called her the ghost. The woman no one respected, until she saved one of their owned, the veteran who never raised her voice, yet left a louder legacy than anyone before her. By the time Class 416 arrived, the stories had taken root. She carried a cadet out of a fire. She shot a perfect group. Blindfolded, she once walked into a war zone, alone, and walked back out with a hostage. Most thought the tales were exaggerated. Some thought she was made up entirely. But a few believed every word, because Jeffries was still out there, no longer a cadet, but a decorated officer, and he made sure her story lived. Each year, he returned once, quietly, no fanfare. He would walk the perimeter of the training field, climb the rope wall, and leave a folded note behind the highest beam, the same place where he'd once left her words. Others began doing the same. It became tradition, unspoken, unofficial, sacred, letters to Carter, notes of doubt, of strength, of fear, of growth. Cadets who'd never met her wrote as if they had. You don't know me, but you've changed everything. When I wanted to quit, I remembered you didn't. This place feels colder without you, but somehow you're still here. Meanwhile, somewhere deep in a region not marked on any public map, Elise Carter was still serving, no longer active Navy, but not retired either. She worked under a different patch now. One that didn't exist on paper. She wasn't chasing medals. She wasn't writing books. She was watching the world's dark corners, helping the right people disappear and the wrong ones be found. Her new team didn't ask questions. They'd heard stories. One night, during a rare pause between assignments, a younger operator approached her beside a campfire. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "is it true you once trained a full class of cadets without telling them who you were?" Elise didn't look up. She was sharpening a blade. "I told them what mattered." The operator hesitated. "What happened to them?" She paused. "They became what they were meant to be." The fire crackled. "Do they know where you are now?" he asked. "No," she said, then added, "But they don't need to, because Elise Carter never needed recognition. She needed results. And the result was this: an entire generation changed because of one woman who walked through their world like smoke." Back at the academy, a new plaque appeared one spring. It sat near the obstacle course, simple, black, etched in steel, no photo, no rank, just 10 words. Strength isn't loud. Real leaders never ask for applause. No signature, none needed. Cadets would touch it as they passed. Some for luck, others for courage. Jeffries visited the plaque during a quiet off-season. He ran a hand across it. Behind him, a young instructor approached. "You trained under her?" Jeffries nodded. "Was she really all that they say?" He didn't answer at first. Just looked out across the empty training field, then finally said, "No." The instructor blinked. "No?" Jeffries turned toward him. "She was more." Back in that unnamed corner of the world, Elise Carter received a package. No return address. Inside a photograph. Team Delta. Her cadets. Now in uniform, grown, confident. A note was taped to the back. "We never forgot. We never will." She didn't smile. But she folded the photo carefully, placed it beside the others. Daniels, Mason, the girl with the glitter-covered letters. Now, her cadets, her legacy. Some people leave behind medals. She left behind fire, and long after she was gone from the academy, her name still traveled, not as a rumor, not as a myth, but as a standard. Elise Carter was never about making noise. She was about making soldiers, and in every one of them, her mission lived on.